November is Scorpio, also known as the sign of the serpent. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Snake Bros! And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, episode 7-4. Coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10.
What episode was that?
7-4. Tangent Cube of Science, nestled amongst the dusty bone of the ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. And don't forget, you guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. That is the email address to get a hold of us. Also, the Twitter feed, Snickers. At Snickers. Snake Bros on Twitter. You guys can get on there and you can talk to us during the show or talk to us during the week when we're not doing the show. Ask us questions, talk shit, give us hashtags, whatever you want to do.
It's at SNKBRS.
That's right. Snake Bros with no vowels. All right. I have my news here. We are ready for space weather news. I freaking love that music. This is from spaceweather.com. If I could pull it up here. Wow, I was not prepared for this.
Back to you, Russ.
Yeah, back to me, Russ. The next geomagnetic storm, another large hole. No, that's last week's. Exiting the solar wind. Earth is exiting a stream of solar wind that ignited an explosion of almost mythical auroras over the Arctic Circle on November 10th and 11th. Another stream of solar wind is coming. Estimated time of arrival, November 18th. Stay tuned. Large solar prominences. The face of the sun is almost completely blank. Not so the edge. Two of the largest prominences in years are dancing around the solar limb, shown here in a November 13th image from NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, and I will post that in the show notes. Prominences are clouds of glowing hot plasma held above the sun's surface by strong magnetic fields. These two are in a constant state of motion, meaning they could be on the verge of collapse. Debris from collapsing prominences can hit the stellar surface below, triggering a Hyder flare, a type of solar flare that does not require sunspots. Amateur astronomers with safe solar telescopes are encouraged to monitor developments.
And from icegenow.info, lack of sunspots to bring record cold, warns NASA scientist. It could happen in a matter of months, says Martin Mlizniak of NASA's legendary research center, Langley Research Center. The sun is entering one of the deepest solar minima of the space age, wrote Dr. Tony Phillips just 6 weeks ago on the 27th of September, 2018. Sunspots have been absent for most of 2018, and Earth's upper atmosphere is responding, says Phillips, editor of spaceweather.com. Data from NASA's timed satellite show, that's all caps, TIMED satellite.
Timed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show that the thermosphere, the uppermost layer of the air around our planet, is cooling and shrinking, literally decreasing the radius of the atmosphere.
Wow.
To help track the latest developments, Martin Mlizniak of NASA's Langley Research Center and his colleagues recently introduced the Thermosphere Climate Index. The Thermosphere Climate Index tells how much heat nitric oxide molecules are dumping into space. During solar maximum, TCI, which is the Thermosphere Climate Index, is high, meaning hot. During solar minimum, it is low, meaning cold. Right now, it is very low indeed, 10 times smaller than we see during more active phases of the solar cycle. So,
wow. So as we're rolling into winter in the northern hemisphere, and we're also in this massive solar minimum.
Yeah, it was interesting how he describes it, like when
the atmosphere bubble shrinks.
Obviously, it does, right? When it cools down, the molecules and atoms aren't moving around and bouncing off each other as quickly.
Right.
So the whole volume of the thing shrinks down. It becomes more dense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That means that cosmic rays can slam into more stuff when they come in
and mess up archaeological dating.
That's right. If current trends continue, it could soon set a space age record for cold. We're not there quite yet, but it could happen in a matter of months.
Wow.
So, what was all that? Oh, yeah. It's the sun.
That's
folks.
right. The chief cause of global warming is the sun. Back to you, Kyle. So, I do think that's interesting. The whole, like, the entire sphere, or the like atmosphere around the Earth, like, will expand farther out into space
when there's sunspots. Right?
Yeah. When the sun is at a more maximum and more, so we have more insolation, which is more light hitting into the atmosphere.
Yeah,
and it heats up the atmosphere, and so the atmosphere expands. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Really cool to think of it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. Take that, flat earthers.
Yeah.
What happens to an atmosphere on a disc? Is it falling off the edges just like the water? I don't know.
It turns into a cylinder when it gets hot.
The cylinder gets taller.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I started doing a little bit of research into climate models, just to add to this little discussion here. And I was curious, like, how do these models work? How do they build them? How do they run them?
Yeah.
And kind of what goes into it. And just a few points that I thought were interesting to think about and to consider when people say, oh, well, you know, scientists have run these models, blah, 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 blah. First of all, they have to, it's a whole bunch of like complex mathematical equations, right? And they're basically making, like, if you think of a Boeing 747, right? It's this massive object.
Yeah.
And it's got all these things. Well, when you build a model of it, it's really small. So you have to, you sacrifice detail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To get proportions and other things, right?
Yeah.
So
and then there's like materials stuff that doesn't work the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they can't, you can't model the climate exactly. You have to sacrifice detail. So you could think about it as like taking the full exterior of the Earth, the surface of the Earth, and making a grid pattern, and then you figure out what happens in one square of the grid, right? And you put all these variables into it, and then you see what happens as you exchange energy into other squares and whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Now, the grid pattern, if you make it extremely small, and each square of the grid,
it takes tons of processing power to figure.
Right.
Yeah.
So these squares are massive squares if you're thinking of how big they would be actually overlaid on the Earth.
Yeah.
Now, we only have fairly accurate weather data on the land masses.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So there's this massive area of the surface of the planet where we don't have a lot of data.
Right.
We have very, very little data.
Yeah.
So number one, you're missing all of that detail, and then you're losing all the detail in terms of the scale of the model that you're building.
Okay, yeah.
On the computer. And then
so we have concentrated point sources of data on land masses.
That's right.
And like a dearth of data over the ocean areas. I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then there's not very much data in like mid-atmosphere, because we have satellite imagery, but those are big swaths too. Like,
right, you got to think about this grid going out three-dimensionally from the surface of the planet too. So there's all these problems with these models, and to assume that they're accurate is just, you just really can't. So what they do is they'll try to simulate past records of climactic data.
Right, and then see if it
comes out right. Okay, so if they get a model that seems to simulate past data accurately, then they'll start applying it to the future and then adding variables, which we don't know if they're going to exist.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just a massive puzzle, and we're nowhere near putting it together. So it's just
climate change. It's only a model. That's how you should think about that. Monty Python just says it all.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I was also looking into the greenhouse gas theory, really, which is what it is. And there was, I know we talked about this before, where Feynman had basically crushed that idea, but
the actual Boyle's law.
Yeah, there was. Pretty much the consensus of scientists up until like the 1950s or something
was global cooling.
The greenhouse gases were not a thing. They had been debunked.
Yeah.
The whole theory had been debunked, and then it just saw this rise again in like the 70s and the 80s. It came back. And so now there's this current consensus that greenhouse gases are a thing.
Yeah.
And it's not a question of whether or not greenhouse gases have an effect. It's whether or not they are greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Like, is
Yeah.
there such a thing
Right.
as the greenhouse effect due to a gas? And it's really not settled.
What it really is greenhouse glasses.
Like rose-colored glasses?
The reason greenhouses are so hot is because of the glass.
Okay.
It lets the sunlight in and won't let it back out.
Oh, I thought you-
Greenhouse glasses.
I thought you were saying the scientists were looking at this with greenhouse glasses.
It could be that too. It's both. This is esoteric here on Snake Bros.
Yeah.
That's really interesting though. Like I did not know that it was that the greenhouse gases were not a thing up until the 70s. Like they were completely debunked or whatever.
Yeah.
That's
like
interesting.
it was presented. I can't remember the guy's name and the exact date, but I think it was somewhere around 1909. Watcher, you may check me on this. The guy that originally came up with the theory
Of greenhouse gases.
of greenhouse gas, like that greenhouse gases certain gases can have a greenhouse effect, right? The greenhouse gas theory. And then it was thoroughly debunked by another scientist at some point. And then Feynman also came out later and was just like, pfft,
Yeah.
you know.
Pressure and
Yeah.
heat. Yeah.
And then I think it was like somewhere around the 1950s, like the overwhelming consensus of scientists, and of course people, scriptards or whatever, you don't have to be a scriptard, but some of the arguments that people will say is like, well, yeah, but back then, you know, it's like we didn't know what we know now. But
Here we go.
You know,
Svante Arrhenius, I think, 1859 to 1927, was a Swedish scientist that was the first to claim in 1896 that fossil fuel combustion may eventually result in enhanced global warming. He proposed a relationship between atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations and temperature.
okay.
So that's the specific for CO2. I wonder if that is the guy who, if that's the same thing as the actual greenhouse gas concept. But that's pretty much the answer we were looking for there. Thanks, Watcher. History of the greenhouse affecting global warming. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so there's this paper that I just read today. RIP, Greenhouse Gas Theory, 1980 to 2018.
R.I.P. in peace.
This is written by John O'Sullivan. It was published January 15th, 2018. And so he basically, he's saying that, okay, so famously on June 24th, 1988, the whole world first heard about the dreaded greenhouse effect from NASA's new champion of the theory, James Hansen. Hansen had breathed life into an old and abandoned theory, drawing from new space research into Venus and Mars.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
the other thing. All of this stuff comes from these scientists analyzing the atmospheres of Venus and Mars.
Yeah.
And so they came up with the theory.
They see that Venus is full of carbon dioxide and that it's incredibly hot.
Yeah.
And they don't want Velikovsky to be right.
Yep.
So they say that it's because of the CO2.
Yeah.
It's not because Venus was a comet.
So thanks to Hansen's role, climate fear prevailed for a generation. Recently, Russian scientists have declared the GHE dead as global cooling sets in, while a team of Italian scientists called for a deep re-examination of the failing theory. Other new papers readily dismiss the CO2 climate hypothesis. Below, we present the stark evidence and encourage readers to engage in their own research. So he goes on a thing about consensus as science.
Yeah.
This is where I got the 1909 thing. The so-called greenhouse gas theory was first famously debunked by Professor H.W. Woods in 1909.
Okay, so that must have been him debunking this other guy, this Svante Arrhenius.
Established scientists usually never decry the Woods debunk. Instead, they gloss over it and the long hiatus that followed 1909 to 1980. So it's like they just stopped arguing about it, and then in the 80s it just shows back up.
Oh, yeah. It's like that one story you told where they did that, where they were like, just stop talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was reading, who's the guy that talks really slow on Ancient Aliens, but he's a genius. The old guy. He wrote the Forbidden Archaeology.
Oh, yeah. Michael Cremo.
Yeah. I was reading his
Yeah.
book. And yeah, they did the same thing with this forbidden archaeology, basically. Somebody discovered these human remains in this place, and it was just inarguable.
irrefutable,
Like,
yeah.
And so they just, their tactic was
somebody
like, okay,
somebody got in charge of the Northwestern whatever, and they were like, just...
yeah, let's just no longer debate it. Let's
Right.
just move on to other topics.
And then he was like, instead of arguing with these people, let's just promote sites that do tell the story we want. That's
Right.
what- yeah. Yep.
Yep. So it was they defeated it by silence,
Yeah.
basically.
Right. So Watcher says methane and nitrous oxide are also technically greenhouse gases. The theory said burning fossil fuels created greenhouse gases. Technically, none of them are greenhouse gases, but whatever. Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, this is a good paper and article, and it's on principiascientific.org.
And who is it by again? Something
John O'Sullivan.
Okay, cool.
And it was written January 15th of 2018. But the comments are at the bottom. A lot of people like have chimed in and said, hey, like, you can't just say this or blanket over this like you didn't. And so he responds like there's a really good conversation going on.
That is cool.
At the end of it. So
I like his title, though. Rip in peace.
Yeah. So check it out. Not saying it's wrong, folks. Just saying it's not settled.
Yeah.
It's not the Manual for the Universe Final Edition.
That's right. The debate has barely just begun. Climate science is very, very young. Most of science is very young, relatively speaking. 200 years of empirical science is not a lot.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking. And climate science is brand new, even in that. So
Right. So I just went to a couple of sites. One of was the NOAA site for that they basically give you a breakdown of how climate models were developed and built and how they work. Yeah. And then there was another site which was like some university. I can't remember what university it was, like Berkeley or something like that, which also gave one.
Yeah.
And I read both of those, and they just, I mean, it's clear that there's just no way to really know if we're getting it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's overall the concern about like what happens when the climate changes, and should we be modeling it? Yes. Like, let's try to figure this out. But to use it, I think the language about the whole topic should be a little more scientific in terms of, but it's been politicized. So.
Right. Yeah. And when that happens, the terms get mushy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember like the thing that I always recall is like the guy who said that like the climate itself is a chaotic, multivariable, decoupled something or other system that is just almost impossible to model. It's just like no variable is necessarily coupled to any other variable.
Yeah.
And you don't know which ones are coupled to any other given variable at any given time because the couplings change.
And it's so massive too,
and
on scale.
It's enormous and it's chaotic and it's just So that's why the butterfly effect is a big
So it's
deal.
like you can you have those like billiard games, the simulations of the pool balls, and how hard you hit this ball and where it's going to bounce off these edges.
Yeah.
Well, imagine you had to have billions of billiard balls and you weren't really sure how big they were and how heavy they were, or where they were located.
Right. And they can exchange mass with each other.
Right. They can exchange mass. That's right. And you don't know what angle the sides of the pool table are at any given moment.
Right.
Or where the pockets are located or how many pockets there are.
Yeah.
And then you just like take the pool cue and you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to imagine that this cue ball weighs X.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hit it. When you don't really know if the cue ball is even there.
Right. And then like randomly people are throwing sand on the table.
That's what I'm saying. Like the cue ball in this analogy is the greenhouse effect. Like we're not really sure if greenhouse gas is a thing, right? It's not really settled. It's still being debated.
Yeah.
And it's not very loudly debated.
Right. The loudness is all in the political aspect of the whole climate change thing, whereas in the actual scientific debate that is going on and people are doing papers on it is all it's all in the DL. Not necessarily because the scientists are trying to keep it that way, but because nobody in the political spectrum is talking about it like that. Yeah.
So if you're building your model and you're putting a variable in there and experimenting by changing the distribution of the variable or how much the variable exists, how much of the variable there is, increasing it, decreasing it, when it may not actually be there at all, then of course, how can you say your model is correct, right?
All I got to say is the hockey stick graph clearly showed global cooling. It's a hockey stick.
What do you mean? I mean, I've heard of the hockey stick thing, but
it's a hockey stick. Hockey's played on ice. Clearly, that shows global cooling.
Okay.
The next ice age. Hockey stick graph. Come on. I'm full of bad dad jokes tonight. Sorry. Right, guys? Come on, guy. Well, is that all the stories you got? Because I don't have anything else for this segment.
Texas something's going on here in politics. Let's see. We don't really talk about politics much, but this is really important. Somebody in Congress here somewhere decided they were going to do something about daylight savings time.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. This is cool, yeah.
Yeah, because we just went through that, and it's dumb. So a push to eliminate daylight savings time in Texas, and this is from San Antonio,
My essay?
KFDM.com.
Okay.
But it says San Antonio.
Yeah.
The San Antonio area state representative is pushing for Texas to get rid of daylight saving time. The twice yearly clock changing event that many say no longer serves a purpose. Representative Lyle Larson filed House Bill 49 on Monday, which would exempt the state of Texas from the federal laws that established daylight saving time. Larson argues that while daylight saving time was meant to give Americans more daylight working hours and conserve energy, modern technology changed that. I have a problem with that sentence. But anyway, in a world without daylight saving time, this is a quote, in a world without daylight saving time, we could all enjoy additional time outdoors by engaging in recreational activities, said Larson. We could maintain our sleep schedules, feeling healthier and happier as a result.
Yeah.
We could end a senseless practice that has many drawbacks and very few, if any, positive aspects.
Yeah. Stop disconnecting us from Magic Universe.
Yeah, that's right. Just last week, California voters approved a measure to make daylight saving time year-round instead of only early March to early November.
Okay.
If approved, Larson's bill would ultimately end daylight saving time and the practice of springing forward and falling back in Texas. Doing something, this is another quote from Larson, doing something just because it has always been done is no reason to continue it. Let's mark the 100th anniversary of this antiquated policy by finally putting an end to it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I didn't know that the 100th anniversary was
I didn't either.
coming up.
Antiquated. I like that.
Yeah,
It's like that meme that I always saw with the guy who was like, I refuse to set my clock back.
yeah.
Now I'm in the future. I'm looking at all of you people in the past. Your customs are so quaint.
Yeah.
So I do have something I forgot. Astronomers found a black hole rotating so fast, it could be spinning space itself. Black holes, while fascinating, are hardly a new discovery, but a black hole spinning at one of the highest speeds ever, according to the Hindustan Times, is a completely different story, especially when there have only ever been 4 others like it. In 2016, India's first dedicated astronomy satellite, the AstroSat, spotted a black hole in the binary star system called 4U 1630-47, which is bursting out X-rays that astronomers found unusual. NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory later confirmed the outburst. Those X-rays were caused by gas and dust falling into the black hole, which is about 10 times the mass of the sun. And they revealed to researchers that the object is spinning very, very rapidly. In fact, according to NASA, this particular black hole is spinning very close to the limit set by Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, according to Rodrigo Nemen, the lead author on the research paper. That means it is spinning close to the speed of light, which I don't really understand.
I don't understand how you can do
what
that.
that means, yeah. Currently, scientists only have 2 ways of measuring black holes, either by their mass or by their spin rate. A spin rate can be anywhere between 0 and 1. This black hole is spinning at the rate of 0.9. Einstein's theory further implies that if a black hole is spinning that fast, then it is capable of making space itself rotate. In fact, if the conditions around black holes are hypothesized to be correct... Wait. What? Okay, let me rephrase this because this is written badly. If the conditions hypothesized around black holes are correct, then the spin rate coupled with the gaseous elements entering the black hole and high temperatures could be the key to understanding how galaxies are formed. Including the black hole discovered by the AstroSat, there are only 5 black holes that have accurately measured high spin rates. Even if you're not taking spin rates into account, this black hole is one of only 20 others that have been spotted in the Milky Way galaxy. Yeah, the watcher's saying stacks on stacks on stacks on stacks of assumptions here. The Indian Space Research Organization's Astrosat, along with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Chandra X-ray Observatory, have confirmed the speed of the spinning black hole. The study was conducted by researchers from multiple institutions, led by the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, and has been accepted for publication in the Astrophysics Journal. This article was initially published by Business Insider, but I read it from ScienceAlert.com.
So I guess if you try to imagine a hole spinning, where is it spinning? Is it, since it's a hole, is it the edge of the hole, which would be everything else? Like,
are you being facetious?
Sort of. So if the black hole
because
is
what
actually
they're talking about is the singularity.
If the black hole is actually an object, well, okay. So if it has any volume whatsoever and it's spinning, like the speed at which it's spinning will be different as you go towards the center of the object.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, no, but you mean the speed of any given material around the center of the object? Yeah. So like stuff on its surface would be the spinning, moving the fastest relative to stuff
because
near the center.
speed is actually distance over time. So if it's a singularity, where's the distance?
Well, because no singularity ever actually gets to a mathematical point because of the time warp that takes place as it folds space around it. So this took me forever to figure out. But basically, once a star collapses past its own, I can't remember what it's called now. Once its core collapses beyond the point where it becomes a black hole, where it becomes dense enough to where the escape velocity from its surface exceeds the speed of light, that basically becomes a black hole. And because of Einstein's theory and the standard model, that means it basically folds space in on itself. The collapse continues forever inside of that hole, but because time is so deeply warped there, to us on the outside, it will never actually complete. Okay. You see what I'm saying? Because as it continues to collapse, time gets slower and slower and slower relative to us out here.
Okay, gotcha.
So it'll never actually reach...
Because it's actually accelerating.
Yeah. There's all kinds of weird stuff happening. But basically, if you fell into a black hole, if I was an outside observer watching you, to you, the time would just seem like you fell in and it was it. It was over, right?
Yeah.
You'd die like that. But I could watch you for 1,000,000 years because as you approach the black hole, you would seem to slow down because of the time warp.
Yeah.
Okay. Time warp is the wrong term, but it's basically...
The time dilation.
Time dilation, yeah. So the time dilation within the event horizon of the black hole is so steep that the black hole's instantaneous collapse into a singularity is going to take functionally forever.
Yeah.
So it never actually completes itself. So there still is an object in there, and it's spinning. And what I don't understand is how the time dilation doesn't make the spin slow down. So the spin may be something else aside from the object itself.
Yeah.
Because the time dilation...
Is this something they're measuring at like the event horizon?
What they're measuring is X-ray outputs being caused by material falling into the event horizon from the accretion disk.
Yeah.
So the material in the accretion disk...
This is a problem I have with some of these stories. Like tell me more,
Yeah.
What do you mean?
No, we assume that you totally understand how black holes work. Or at least you understand the standard model theories.
You know that scientists have been talking about these things for a long time. So guess what? It's spinning really fast.
But all they're saying really is that the X-ray outputs that they're seeing, and those X-rays must come from outside of the black hole. They cannot come from within the event horizon because X-rays are light.
Yeah. But the gravity can somehow get out. Just saying. Shh.
Yeah, somehow gravity is not affected by itself.
Yeah.
Don't know how that works.
How come the gravity can't get so strong that it pulls its own gravity in?
Right. How come when the gravity gets really powerful, we don't stop feeling it because it's holding itself down? Yeah, I don't know. But the idea of the spin... The other thing is that black holes can be magnetic too, but they don't ever talk about that, So I don't know. Anyway, from what I know, the spin is not actually... No one's sure if it's the singularity object itself, the collapsing core on the inside of the event horizon.
Okay.
There's just some kind of angular momentum that's taking place, and it may just be the accretion disk. But the assumption, the assumption is that the accretion disk itself is disk-shaped and spinning because of the spinning of the object inside the event horizon.
Right.
But again, time dilation seems to make that, like, if it can't collapse on itself all the way because of the time dilation is so steep, then how can it be spinning so fast? Yeah.
Good point.
No one knows. That's the answer to that.
Yep. All right. Well,
We're done with this section?
yeah, man.
All right.
It's over.
So I'm sad.
Let's get out of here. Winter has come for the snakes here in the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of hibernation. We have our heat lamp on. We no longer have to turn the AC on between podcast segments.
Yep. It's great. It is great.
And finally, I get my first turn to introduce from high atop the Earth in his secret space station, in his secret bunker, and deep beneath secret outer space, the Watcher. How you doing out there, buddy?
Good, man. That's it's good to be introduced by the other snake bro.
Yeah, I never get to do that. I don't even get to do the intros ever anymore. If you go listen to like episode 2, I introduced it, and then I lost my job. And everybody knows why.
Oh, that's good stuff.
That's cracking me up. I lost my job.
Yep.
All right.
I was relegated to the resident scriptard.
Okay. Once again, I have...
There I went using a word that I'm not really sure what the definition of it is again. Damn it.
What?
I think it's right. Relegated. I don't know.
Yeah, relegated is correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Got that one right.
Got it right.
I have this tendency to use words that I've only heard and understood that
In
I think I
context.
understand them contextually.
Yeah.
And then I'll use them. I just incorporate them into my...
Yeah. It works. Relegated is the right word.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I get worried about it. And then I have to look it up after the show.
Yeah. Did I use wrong word? Yeah. How you say, yeah.
Posthumously. That's not quite the same thing. But.
Okay, so after the 411 segments from the last show, Kyle and Brett and I had a pretty long discussion in between the week about the whole topic. And one of the things I wanted to kind of go over was so I told the story of the guy who had the personal transponder, and the transponder goes off, right? And they go to find him, and they end up finding him like wedged down in this crack that he would have had to climb up to the top of this granite spire to get into, and there was inclement weather and all that kind of stuff. So what I thought was interesting was like, so I'm thinking about it, and like I'm at work and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, so the question is why did he go up there in the first place? You know, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe he was running from something and he's trying to get away, because I'm trying to figure out why would this guy climb this in this horrible weather? And I'm thinking maybe he goes up there and that's why he gets down and he like sort of tries to wedge himself down in that crack, and then he sets off his transponder and then he passes out from the cold or whatever and falls. Okay, and that's what ends up killing him. And Kyle was like, well, he didn't have to be running from anything. He could have just climbed up there and been like, wow, look at all this geology and look at these rocks. And like he was saying that was something that we would do. And like that's
like maybe he spent an hour up there before the weather came.
Yeah.
And then when the weather came, it was like, he was like, man, I got to get shelter, but I can't get down.
Right. And so then he gets down in the crack and the same thing happens. He passes out and falls.
Yeah.
After he sets his transponder off. So those are two possibilities. The thing I was thinking is that like when you're by yourself, you know, except if you're me, if you're like an experienced hiker, most experienced hikers know not to do that kind of thing. Usually, you know, the question becomes like, why did he go up there? Because he's an experienced and avid hiker. And experienced hikers know not to do something dangerous like that. Usually, that doesn't mean that he couldn't have just been like, I want to go up there because he sees something cool, or just gets wild hair up his ass and decides to climb the thing.
Yeah.
So that to me is an interesting conversation because of the two ways that we interpret it. I'm assuming the guy's running from something, and that's the only reason he would go up there. And Kyle's pointing out, like, no, like you can't just say that. Like, just because the guy was a good hiker that went on solo hikes all the time and didn't do stupid stuff like that on all those other hikes doesn't mean he didn't do something dumb this one. And that is something that people will commonly say about some of these stories. Like, look, that story isn't necessary. It might be mysterious, but it isn't necessarily mysterious in the same way. Like, you can explain it in a totally mundane way, and that's not, it isn't out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, but it's also a lot of times things are only dumb in retrospect.
Yeah.
Like when you don't realize it's dumb until you're dead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's
or
true.
until right before you die. You're like,
yeah, you don't realize it was a mistake until, yeah, that's true. So what I've tried to do in this, when I'm going through this book and I'm picking out these stories and I'm marking them, I'm trying to pick ones that don't have stuff like that in it. But that doesn't, I may not have succeeded because I don't always see those. Kyle is a lot better at these, I've found, when I tell these stories. He's a lot better at finding how, like, this could be totally normal. I read it and I'm like, oh my God, that's freaking weird. And he's like, no, it's not. That guy just, like, lost his water. And I'm like, oh shit, you're totally right. So that's what I've tried to do here, is sort of try to pick ones that that when I'm reading the book, they stand out to me. That's basically what I've done here. So the first one, the reason this one stood out is because it's two people vanishing at the same time. That's very rare. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this was short. This is from Vancouver Island. It's Alma Hall, 28 years old, and her son Raymond Hall, 6 years old. Okay. They went missing in 0609 1951. It was Waslogging, Inglewood, Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Alma Hall and her son Raymond left their Saskatoon residence to visit Thomas Glenn Hall, the boy's father, and Alma's husband. Glenn worked for Waslogging at W Camp in Inglewood, outside of Alert Bay. This is a rural camp near the Nipkish River. On June 9th, 1951, Alma took Raymond for a hike in the woods to a waterfall on the Nipkish River. Loggers saw the boy and the woman near the falls, but this was the last time anyone ever saw the pair. Glenn was quickly made aware of the disappearance. He notified the RCMP and gathered a group of the best loggers and woodsmen in the area to search for the family. The RCMP dragged the river while the others focused on the land. A search of over a week failed to find the two people, and neither body ever floated up in the river. It was as if the mother and son had vanished. So there's not a whole lot of detail on that one, but it's pretty rare when two people vanish without a trace.
Yeah.
At the same time. So now, in that one, it's not one possibility, obviously, that people would think of immediately, I think, is murder of some kind, because they weren't by themselves. They were near a bunch of lumberjacks.
So they could have been abducted, and
Yeah.
but it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
It's hard to abduct two people.
Yes, it is. Okay. Next story. This one is so some of these I picked out because of the age of the person vanishing. So this one, that's what this one is. Daryl Webley, missing 04/30/1949 at 4 p.m., Colville, Washington. This is Washington State. Age of disappearance 2. Okay. It's hard to say that this person got lost, right?
Yeah.
The Webley family lived in a small house on the far outskirts of Colville, Washington. The city sits just 20 miles west of the Idaho border and has an American Indian reservation as its neighbor. On April 30th, 1949, Daryl Webley was playing in the yard outside his home at approximately 4 p.m. Somehow his parents lost track of him and he disappeared. The parents initially searched the yard and surrounding area, yelling the boy's name and asking neighbors for help, and he wasn't found. They contacted local law enforcement, who then requested federal assistance. The Washington Highway Patrol responded along with local sheriffs. The Stevens County Sheriff took command of the situation and placed a call to Spokane for canines from the Coast Guard. Throughout the first night, searchers scoured everything within 2 miles of the residence, finding nothing of value. At 5:30 the following morning, the canines arrived and were given a whiff of Daryl's scent from his clothing. The dogs took off at a slow run and led searchers to a ravine approximately 1 mile from the residence. At this first location, they found the boy's cap, his pants, and one of his shoes, but then they found him alive. Approximately 30 minutes later and further up the canyon, the searchers found the boy. A May 2nd, 1949 article in the Lewiston Tribune reported, "The boy, Daryl Webley, was almost nude and badly scratched when the dog led rescuers to him. He was cold and wet after his 14-hour experience, during which rain fell and the temperature dropped to 35 degrees. He was taken to a local doctor and found to have a mild case of exposure. Okay, so Paulides gives a case summary on this one. He says, this is an unusual case for several reasons. Number one, many cases in this book reveal that canines usually do not work in these situations, but they did in this case. I can't explain why they tracked the scent this time. Maybe it was that the dogs were not from the area or perhaps were trained differently. Number two, it was a cold night with bad weather. Nobody removes colding when it's moderately cold. In other words, he wasn't hypothermic. What?
What did he say? Nobody removes clothing?
Yeah. In other words, like you don't get paradoxical undressing when it's just moderately cold.
Yeah, but a 2-year-old will remove clothing
For no reason at all.
Yeah, just
shoes, pants, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And when it's cold, you're like, dude, what are you doing? It's freezing out here. Ah. They just don't know.
Small children take the path of least resistance. The fact that this is also all this that he's saying is based on statistics, not necessarily in the individual. The fact that this little boy had severe scratches on his body doesn't make sense. A child of 2 years old isn't running at high speed through the brush. He is moving slowly to ensure he won't get hurt. Number 4, before the dogs arrived, over 200 people unsuccessfully searched the area where he was later found. That doesn't make sense either. So, and the other reason I wanted to point this, I think the main reason I picked this story out is because of the skirp-derping that happens with the dogs. So when dogs can't track and there's inclement weather, people are like, well, the rain, like, they can't, after a while, the rain washes this. No, it was raining through the whole time, right? They bring the dogs in at the end of a week of rain, or whatever, not a week, I'm sorry, it was 14 hours. They bring the dogs in at the end of this long search. It's been raining the whole time, and the dogs track straight to him. Okay?
Yeah.
Rain does not wash away scent. It doesn't.
Yeah. It may even enhance it.
Right. But people say that all the time.
Clint told us that like dogs can't track when it's too dry.
Yeah, if it's too dry, it's hard to track. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. But like people sweat, Like if it's dry and hot, and you're sweating,
Yeah.
you're gonna leave a scent.
Unless it evaporates before you get there, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay. Got these things are sticking my pages together. Shit. Okay. I think this one is, let's see, 6. Which one is it? I don't know which one it is. Well, I'll just read on this. Okay, so Richard Herman, missing 08/30/59 at noon, Immigrant State Park in Oregon. Age of disappearance 6. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Herman of Sunnyside, Washington took their family to Immigrant State Park in northeastern Oregon for a weekend in the woods. On August 30 at approximately noon, the Herman's 6-year-old son went missing while playing hide and seek with other children. Circumstances very similar to the disappearance of Dennis Martin from the Great Smoky Mountains. The family immediately started to search the area but could not find the boy. A call was soon made to the local sheriff's department. 8 o'clock in the morning after Dickie went missing, a deputy on horseback found him. He was 9 miles from where he was last seen. He was walking a trail when the deputy happened to spot him. He had wandered through miles of brush and timber before being found near Meacham, Oregon. Searchers described him as tired and hungry, but despite his tear-stained face, he was in remarkably good condition.
9 miles is a long way.
Yeah.
Through the woods.
Yeah. And let's see. He went missing on the 30th, and at noon, at 8 o'clock the next morning, he was 9 miles away. That's a long way.
Yeah.
And he's 6 years old. And this is the other thing. The one thing I don't understand about this is when these kids go missing, the first thing that happens is parents start going, hey, are you out there? Blah, 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 right? Like Kyle and I have worked in places that are really remote, rugged, up and down or whatever. And we're walking apart from each other for 20 minutes. And then like we have radios and like I'll be like, hey, give me a shout. And he'll shout and I can tell which direction he is in from his shout. And I can still hear him after we've been, we're separated far from each other with hills in between us. And he's all, hey, and I can hear it faintly out there. So how do these kids disappear? And then within a couple of minutes, their parents start looking for him and shouting and it's nothing.
Yeah. But if you're moving or if you're making a lot of noise in the brush where you are, you may not hear it. You have to stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but if there's constant shouting, there should be a point where you would hear it.
Yeah, you eventually hear it. Or you start shouting and the other people hear you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing is like, why don't these people make noise when they go missing? You know?
They don't know they're missing.
I'm not missing. I'm right here. Okay. Let's see. I don't know if this is what I was supposed to read, but I'll just go ahead. Okay. James McCormick. 1961, Larch Mountain, Multnomah Falls in Oregon. He was 16. Okay. Multnomah Falls is approximately 30 miles east of downtown Portland. It sits adjacent to the Columbia River and is one of the most beautiful waterfalls you will ever see. The area to the south of the falls is Larch Mountain, and this area is very rugged and wild. On December 4th, 1961, James McCormick Sr., his son, and their hunting dog left their Portland residence for a bobcat shoot at Larch Mountain. Mr. McCormick was on vacation from his job as a fire inspector for the city of Portland and enjoyed the outdoors. Even though Larch Mountain was only 30 miles from a metropolitan setting, don't let that fool you. It gets very wild very quickly in this region of the Northwest. The first day they were hunting, the weather started to turn bad. The first indicator of cold striking the area was a heavy rain, which was soon followed by snow that blanketed Larch Mountain. The three were temporarily lost, and the three is Mr. McCormick, his son, and the dog, I think is what it is, right? Is that right? Yeah. And their hunting dog, yeah. So the three of them get lost and spent the night huddled in a tree for protection. The next morning, they started back out, but were again lost. And for some unknown reason, James Jr. became, quote, delirious, unquote, according to a December 4th, 1961 article in the Eugene Register. James Sr. carried his 215-pound son for 3 hours before he became exhausted and laid him down. He told the boy to stay put while he went to investigate what he thought were car lights. He returned to the area in just minutes and found the boy had disappeared. James Sr. searched for his son for almost an hour and then left to get help. Many hours later, James Sr. stumbled into the Multnomah Falls Lodge. 200 off-duty firefighters from Portland responded to assist in the search for James Jr. Sheriff's Department searchers used canines and planes to search the mountain. Searchers found the case for the boy's glasses, and his socks and boots were found somewhat near where the father had lost the boy. Later in the day, searchers found James's body at the bottom of a slight cliff 300 yards from where they had found his clothing, and he was dead. The appearance of the body made the searchers believe that he didn't die from a fall. Several articles stated that James Jr. may have died from exposure, but there was no definitive statement.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Yeah.
Socks and boots gone. Like, why would you do that out in the middle of the woods?
Right. And it was raining, and then it started to snow. And then they stayed in the tree overnight, and it was snowing and stuff. And then the snow was so deep, the next day he was trying to carry his son, and he couldn't through the snow, so he put him down.
How old was he?
16.
Yeah, big boy.
Yeah. Many questions arise from this case, and many of the facts mimic those throughout this book. People are out in the woods with the dog. The weather turns bad. One person becomes dazed or delirious, gets lost, and later loses articles of clothing. The lost person is later found. Sometimes they are alive, sometimes not. I am interested in the statement made by Mr. Cormick about seeing lights and going to search for them. What kind of lights would he see in the middle of the wilderness that could be mistaken for headlights?
Yeah.
I did think that was weird, too. He thought he saw car lights.
Folk.
Yeah, it's the fae.
Yeah, so the undressing thing, like I definitely think I agree with you on all those points about paradoxical undressing and all that kind of stuff. But like, I have a 2-year-old and have had one for almost a year.
Yeah.
And he can go pretty far, pretty fast. Like 1 minute he's like right there in the yard, and the next minute he's like at the end of the driveway near the road. And I'm like, whoa, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And removes his shoes just like randomly,
Yeah. I thought of that too. It's like some of the little kids' clothing coming off could be maybe.
Like
but I saw him today. So he was up at the top today, this morning. So I get up and I take him outside. I'm like, let's go check the grow room, right? It's freezing.
Yeah.
So he goes out there and he's like,
yeah,
there's no taking clothes off. Like he was cold. He was like wanting more jackets. And that's what I'm imagining is like the kid is like running around outside in the cold or whatever. It's hard for me to imagine it.
But when he was first 2 years old, he might have done that. Like it's like he didn't correlate him being warm with the clothes on his body. Like it wasn't making that connection yet.
Yeah. That's interesting.
He would like go outside, naked basically when it was like cold, right? And you're just like, dude, you can't come out here. And he's just like, like they might recognize that it's cold, but they don't realize that them taking off their shoes their feet are going to freeze. You know?
Yeah. Well, and another thing that I've seen in some of these cases with the little kids, like your guy his shoes are Velcro, and he still doesn't really want to put them on and off himself.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure he could kick them off if he was really determined.
Oh, he does he will take them off like crazy.
But he won't put them on.
Right.
But if you got lace-up boots on him,
he can get them off.
you think he can get them off?
They can. I mean, we do
I'm
have
have to run some experiments.
We do have some boots. We do have some boots that lace up, and he can get them off. Like, you do all this work to get him on there, and then you put him in the car seat, and you're like, just a short little drive. And then when you get there, he has no shoes or socks. Like, you were restrained in this chair. How did you do that?
Maybe it wasn't him.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this is a really old case, but, and so, a lot of times the older the cases are, the data gets less detailed, but this one is very interesting to me. And this is in Crater Lake, okay? B.B. Bukowski. This guy's initials are BBB, okay? Missing 02/22/1911, Crater Lake National Park. The age of disappearance, 30. B.B. Bukowski broke new ground in photography. He made Burns, Oregon his home. He was 30 years old, had a girlfriend, and truly enjoyed the pristine beauty that Oregon affords its residents. While making a name for himself in landscape photography, he temporarily lived in a rooming house in Klamath Falls, Oregon, 150 miles southwest of Burns. He chose to photograph Crater Lake in the summer months of 1910. He made the trip on the rough and winding road from Klamath Falls. The road winds through heavy forests and mountains that eventually leads up to the lake. He was greatly rewarded upon arrival. He was astounded by the beauty of the lake and was enthralled with the idea of photographing the region on a future trip during the winter, something that had never been done before at that point. On or near February 1st, 1911, Bukowski left his boarding house with 2 months' worth of supplies and took his snow sled to the trailhead to start his one-man excursion to the lake. The snow was very high in February of 1911, but he told people the route he would take and the exact place he would be staying. He advised his friends to start looking for him if he wasn't back in a month. According to articles published in the Mail Tribune between February 2nd and March 3rd, 1911, a search party was sent to the lake to search for Bukowski when he hadn't returned. Frank Burns and Alfred Gibson were the first two searchers that left for Crater Lake to look for him. They returned to report that they had found his sled and shovels. They found these items covered in snow approximately 1.5 miles east of the lake. They indicated that there were no supplies on the sled, and they believed he had arrived safely and had stored the supplies elsewhere. A later article indicated that searchers from Medford had gone to look for Bukowski. They found his camera cases at the park's hotel building on the lake rim, but they failed to find any of his other supplies. A final article was published days after the previous one, stating that searchers believed Bukowski had died. They had gone back to the location near the sled and found wood that had been chopped. They dug into the deep snow until they found a large canvas covering a 10-foot deep tunnel where Bukowski's supplies were located. At the entrance to the tunnel, searchers found a pencil stuck in the snow. Inside the tunnel, searchers found 3 cases of exposed film and 60 cases of unexposed film. They also found his telescope, provisions, shoes, socks, underwear, extra clothing, and other supplies. Searchers believe that Bukowski was in the tunnel for up to 3 nights based on what they observed. The searchers made one very interesting notation. No cooking utensils were ever found. Searchers did find 2 of Bukowski's cameras at the lodge building on the rim of the lake, a logical place to leave them since that was his primary position to take photos. So he had gone up there, hoofed it up there with a sled in the snow, found a spot, dug a tunnel in the snow, unloaded made himself an igloo, basically, unloaded all of his supplies in there and was basically living out of the tunnel and covering it up with the tarp during the day, going up to the hotel porch over the rim of the lake to take pictures, and disappeared
crazy.
off the, yeah. That's in 1911, people were hardcore.
Yeah, it was hardcore. He was getting ready for the trenches.
Yeah, Bukowski was the first case in the modern era of someone disappearing at Crater Lake. His disappearance is quite interesting for a multitude of reasons. 6 people have disappeared in the Crater Lake region during the winter months, an odd statistic considering 90% of the visitation to the area occurs during the summer. It's obvious that Bukowski made it to his destination. He was able to set up a nice shelter in a snow tunnel. He brought 63 rolls of unexposed film for a 3 to 4 week excursion. If he had planned to be at the lake for 21 days, he would have used approximately 3 rolls of film per day. 3 rolls of exposed film were found. Bukowski was obviously making noise while at his campsite he was chopping wood. If anyone had been in the area, they would have heard the chopping. If he had started a fire and cooked food, the odors would have permeated the area around his camp, letting anyone in the region know he was there. Bukowski had stretched the canvas cover over his tunnel prior to the last time he left it. It seems quite odd that searchers did not find cooking utensils at the site. Was Bukowski cooking at the site when he heard something, went outside, and was taken? Maybe he casually went out with his plate of food and was taken. It's possible. It's also possible he was at the hotel building and something drastic happened. 2 of his cameras were found at the building near the edge of the lake. And this is the exact location where Charles McCullough would later disappear in 1976. Whoa. Some people may easily explain the disappearance of Bukowski as an accident. He slipped into the lake and drowned. I don't think so. I've always believed that people are much more careful when they are alone in the wild, with no possibility of rescue, which is the exact situation that Bukowski was in. He knew the risks associated with his excursion, and he would have been extremely careful. One last item not mentioned in the area reports is that no firearms were ever found with his supplies. If Bukowski was outside the tunnel and there was a threat, he would have had a firearm. Where was it?
Well, so they didn't never find him, right? His body was never found.
He's never been found. Or his third camera. One of the things I noticed in this is a lot of people step out of their car with a camera and vanish as though they took a picture of something that didn't want its picture taken. That's what I thought immediately. But like the girl that we read from the last one, they find her lens cap.
That's freaky, dude.
She popped in there and was like, and something's like, and just like takes her because like it was in the photo, you know. The camera's never found, the person's never found. Like, and how would you even know? There are other ones in here I've read where like, you know, it's an old lady. She just stops at a roadside overlook, you know, and they just find her car there. The window's down, her stuff's all in the car, right? But her camera is gone, and she's gone, and her shoes are just off the edge of the.
Man, that's crazy.
You know what I'm saying? Like she took a picture, not even knowing whatever was in the photograph.
Yeah, she's like, there's a Sam Squanch. Jumps out. Click.
Yeah.
And obviously, shoes can't go through portals.
Or Sam Squanches can run so fast that they just knock you out of your
yeah.
shoes and they pick you up. Yeah.
Well, like,
There's a Sam Squanch.
look, Mabel. So I guess they're suggesting that there was a fire. Like they found a.
Yeah, they found a full.
Because they found chopped wood, but they didn't. Did they say they found a campfire?
They didn't say that specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. There's chopped wood, but they only mentioned that there's no cooking utensils. They didn't say that there was like embers or coals where he was cooking.
Yeah.
Or
that there was any kind of fireplace spot or whatever. Yeah.
Or they didn't say that there was any food in his pack.
Well, it said they found all of his supplies. Let's see. His supplies were located in the tunnel, and I suppose the food was included with that. And
it's just strange that they mention the cooking utensils, but they don't mention the type of food.
Yeah, that's true.
That he had, or whether or not there was an actual like fireplace
or fire spot,
where it was obvious he had been burning.
Right.
You know,
that he chopped a lot of wood. See, I think that what Paulides is suggesting, they were thinking that he was saying that the articles he read implied that the searchers thought he may have been there for 2 or 3 days. But Paulides is saying he thinks he was there for less than a day. He had set up the whole camp and was chopped a bunch of wood, but then went up to take pictures and
never started a fire. Went up there to take. That's what I'm saying. Like they don't mention that there was a fire located there.
Exactly.
Or the remnants of a fire.
Yeah.
So yeah, he vanished like right off the bat.
Yeah.
He had taken enough pictures for one day. Or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. On average, because he had all these cases of film, and Paulides is like, if you split all these up for the amount of time he was supposed to be there, that he said he was going to be there, you'd take 3 cases.
Yeah, and he probably, like, if you looked at that exposed film, like, maybe he was taking pictures on his way there.
Yeah. And remember that he had been there in the summer, too, so he knew exactly the spots he wanted to take photos from of the lake in the winter.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. I also would have been interested to know what the exposed film had taken pictures of.
Yeah.
This
is the frustrating thing about some of these stories. It's like, what was in the pictures?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Let's see. Go to my next one here. Okay, Herbert Brown. Nope, sorry, Jess Davis. Missing 05-08-55 in the AM, Gopher Valley, McMinnville, Oregon. Age of disappearance 2. So this is another 2-year-old. Note, this disappearance occurred to the west of the Cascades, yet is included in this chapter because it fits the profile of other young boys who have gone missing in the Cascades. Okay, so he's basically included this in the Cascades cluster, even though, yeah. Okay, the Davis family left their home in the Dalles, not sure how to say it, Dalles, to visit the ranch of Mr. and Mrs. William Fagan, the parents of Mrs. Davis, on the outskirts of McMinnville, Oregon. On Sunday morning, May 8th, 1955, Jess Davis was in the backyard of the ranch house and his 3 sisters were playing in the front yard. Jess was alone for 10 minutes when the family realized he was missing. The search for Jess was started immediately with hollering, walking the grounds, etc., but they couldn't find the boy. A call was made to the local sheriff and a formal search was initiated. The sheriff called for 3 teams of bloodhounds to report to the Fagan Ranch. The bloodhounds could not pick up a scent. Over 100, and that's weird, like he was in the yard. They know where he was, right? So how the bloodhounds not be able to, when you have a definite place of where he was, it's strange. Over 100 professional and volunteer searchers scoured the hillsides in an effort to find the young boy. Teams continued to search through the night without any success. In the morning hours of May 9th, loggers were walking through a valley in Panther Creek and heard someone crying. The men walked towards the sound and they found Jess Davis. He had been missing for 24 hours in 40-degree temperatures but appeared to be in satisfactory condition. A doctor examined the boy and found deep scratches on his legs. The loggers stated that it appeared as though the boy had been wading in the creek even though the water and outside temperatures were very cold. The idea that a 2-year-old boy survived 24 hours in the woods of Oregon is an interesting story in and of itself. An article in the Daily Chronicle of May 9th, 1955 reported the following, quote, "It appeared that the child had covered about 6 miles, part by road and part over a hill in a circuitous journey. Searchers were puzzled about how Jess Davis got so far in the brush-covered country," unquote. I referenced a terrain map to understand the topography of this area. Jess Davis had to cross at least 2 sets of mountains with an average elevation of 1,000 feet in order to reach Panther Creek. The map does show a distance of 6 miles, air miles. The idea that a 2-year-old boy could cover that distance in 24 hours makes me as puzzled as the searchers were in 1955.
Okay, so personal anecdote. My 2-year-old would go on walks with Laura, and she'll have to carry him after a while. Like, he can't go that far. Like,
Right.
he can't even go to the end. How far is it from here to the cul-de-sac at the end of the road or whatever?
No, yeah, 2 miles.
Yeah, he can't.
A mile or 2 miles, something like that.
He's like,
It's too far.
done. And, there's some steep hills here, but
Yeah.
not that high.
Right. Not 1,000 feet.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That seems extraordinary.
Yeah. And it's like legs are covered in scratches and, like he was bushwhacking without any whack.
Yeah. Well, they can get their legs covered in scratches pretty good, but
Yeah.
traveling 6 miles up and down mountains is,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
But then again, I wouldn't know what they would do if there wasn't somebody there to pick them up. Like, maybe they do have that energy or the ability to keep going.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to test it.
Right. How about you just go and we'll see how far you get.
Yeah.
Put a GPS tracker on him and let him go. Okay. Derek Engebretson, I think. Missing 1205. Missing 120598. Winnema National Forest, Rocky Point, Oregon. Age of disappearance 8. Rocky Point is located adjacent to Highway 140 on the banks of Upper Klamath Lake. It sits just on the east side of the Sky Lakes Wilderness Area, a very desolate and wild region of Oregon. This is the area that Robert Engelbretson picked for a Christmas tree cutting excursion for his dad and his son, Derek. So the 3 made the 50-mile drive from their home in Bonanza through beautiful forests and a gorgeous setting to get to the lake. It was in late afternoon that the boys reached the area near Rocky... Boys, it's not really boys. It's a grandfather, the father, and the son.
Yeah.
They reached the area near Rocky Point to look for their Christmas tree. Derek was bundled in winter clothes and carried a small hatchet. There was snow on the ground, and the boys walked around the area trying to find the right tree. Both Robert and his father thought that each were watching Derek, but it turned out that neither was. Soon they forgot the tree and needed to find Derek. Just west of the location where Derek disappeared is a very steep mountain leading into a wilderness area. To the east is a small highway and then the lake. There were not a lot of places for Derek to hide. The men realized they hadn't heard Derek for a while and started to call his name. Soon they were frantically looking for the boy. The men flagged down a passing car and asked the driver to contact the sheriff for assistance. A storm had just arrived in the area and a light snowfall was starting. This light snowfall would soon turn into a major storm that crippled the search effort. The ledger of response activity to Rocky Point follows. So now he has this time stamp thing. 4:38 p.m. The temperature in the area was 23 degrees and the snow was falling heavily. 5:01 p.m. Still no deputy on site, claimed he was caught in the storm, asked for assistance from state police. 5:04 p.m. Sheriff Sergeant requests a SAR response, or search and rescue. The search is being conducted between Rocky Point and mile marker 12. 5:36 p.m. 911 calls SAR team again with a request response. 911 is told that it is a whiteout and the SAR team is having their annual Christmas party. Shit.
Oh, no.
5:39 p.m. State police say that they are now sending snowmobiles. 6:30 p.m. U.S. Forest Service law enforcement officer Doug Corrigan arrives at Rocky Point. 6:45 p.m. Sheriff Buckhart gets on the radio and requests update. 7 p.m. 5 state troopers arrive at the search location. Sergeant Bill Floyd, Lieutenant, names them all here. 7:31 p.m. Snow stops falling. 8:25 p.m. 4 hours and 12 minutes after the original 911 call. Dispatch calls Sheriff Burkhart asking when SAR is going to respond. He states that there is no ETA because of weather and snow conditions. 8:44 p.m. Klamath Falls PD offers snowmobiles from a local shop owner. 9 p.m. The first SAR units arrive, including trackers Larry Hawkins and Dan Anderson. 9:30 p.m. 5 hours and 17 minutes after original 911 call, 17 Klamath County search and rescue units arrive at the scene. So when the weather did clear, the Air Force sent a forward-looking infrared radar-equipped helicopter into the area to scan the mountainsides for heat, but nothing was found. Now, that's another strange thing to me. Like, I've used infrared gear, and you can see everything. Anything that's hot is bright in the cold, right? So if you've got some kid stumbling through the woods or whatever, and you're in a helicopter looking down with FLIR, you're going to see him.
Yeah. Unless he's buried under something.
Right. Exactly.
Or hiding under something.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Okay, searchers poured into the area the following days and trudged through deep snow looking for Derek. The search effort did find some interesting items. On the hillside far above the location where Derek disappeared, searchers found a crude shelter that was made out of several fallen fir trees. The shelter probably could not have been penetrated by FLIR, or the forward-looking infrared radar, as there were large logs utilized in the construction, which also means that Derek didn't build it, right?
Yeah. How old was he?
6. Or let me make sure. I don't want to get this wrong. 8. He's 8 years old. Okay. Let's see. Canines were at this location, but did not hit on Derek's scent at the shelter. On the same mountainside, they also found shoestrings, a torn T-shirt, and eyeglasses. That's how complete the search was. They're finding like shoestrings on the ground and glasses, and During the course of the last several years, investigators have interviewed dozens of people, from rapists to pedophiles, all with interesting results, but all without finding Derek or concrete clues of his whereabouts. Some investigators believe that Derek made it back to the highway where someone picked him up. Other private trackers believe Derek fell through the ice at the lake and drowned. The problem with the drowning theory is that Derek's body never surfaced. I also don't believe that Derek would have crossed the road knowing that his dad and grandfather were on the other side of the road. Or were on the side of the road that he was on. Robert Ingebrigtsen spent weeks at the site searching for his son. Derek's mom, Lori, also spent weeks searching and supporting other SAR members in their efforts. The Ingebrigtsens left a Christmas tree up in their house for 3 years, hoping Derek would return home. Man.
Golly.
Derek's grandfather, Bob, beat himself up badly after the disappearance, taking the blame for Derek vanishing. Case summary. I went to the spot where Derek disappeared. It is a lonely spot in the winter, and there is very little vehicular traffic the day I was there. The idea that Derek made it back to the road and a vehicle happened to come by and pick him up with a pedophile in it seems highly unlikely. However, I am very concerned about the fact that 3 8 to 9-year-old boys have disappeared in a 40-mile radius of Crater Lake National Park in very remote areas of the woods. The fact that there is not significant press coverage on this issue is even more disturbing. So that's one of the reasons why I was going with this case.
Yeah.
It's like, this is in a tiny area, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
That all these very young boys just vanish, and like dogs and helicopters, and just no one can find them,
Yeah, that's crazy. Never found.
Right. And they find pieces of their stuff at the, like if you find, usually when you find shed articles of things, you're close to the person.
Yeah. So what does, this is another thing. Like, it doesn't say that the shoestring and piece of a
belong to
shirt,
him.
and the glasses were actually his belongings, which
Yeah, it
is
doesn't.
his family could have confirmed that they were his.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
you know,
it
so
doesn't
what does
say
that mean? Like, they found a shelter.
Right. Are they his stuff?
And then where did they find him? Did they find him near that shelter that obviously he didn't build?
Yeah.
Or it's just...
I think it did say that. Let's see.
It just says they also
On
found...
the same mountainside
okay.
as the shelter, they found shoestrings, a torn T-shirt, and eyeglasses.
Yeah. But it doesn't say they were his belongings.
No, I think that's the implication, but you're right. It doesn't say it specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just a question, right? Like,
Yeah.
were
they his? Yeah. Yeah. And there's a picture of the boy in here, and he's not wearing glasses in the photo, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I don't see any shoestrings in there either.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
But it would be weird if those glasses like belonged to an adult.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
that would. Yeah, I think they would mention that if it was like, if the glasses or whatever belonged obviously to an adult, because he's 8. Your glasses for an 8-year-old are going to be small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't say. So you're just
Right.
like,
Right.
I don't know.
Found massive aviators.
Yeah.
That obviously belong to Sam Squanch.
Yeah, exactly. Was there a hair stuck in the nose piece? You know, was it red?
Okay. Okay, well, this segment's over. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more 411 in a minute. Our pyramid is tied behind our backs just to make it square. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Talking Missing 411. And I want to go through the sort of what Paulides has kind of made this case famous. This is the Charles McCullough case. We've talked about this before. This is the guy who melted into his pants or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Crater Lake. But the details in the book are good. Okay. Charles McCullough. Missing at 10/14/76, Crater Lake National Park, age of disappearance 19. The disappearance of Charles McCullough is as unnerving as the finding of his skeletal remains. Official documents and facts surrounding the case were extremely difficult to find. I submitted a series of FOIA requests to the MPS over several months. The official response from Charis, I'm not sure how to say it, maybe it's Charis Wilson of MPS in Denver states that they have lost all reports on this related to this incident. They claim that the park did not have the space to maintain these files, so they were destroyed. I asked if the regional office or MPS headquarters in Washington, D.C. had copies. No, those also were missing. An organization called the Crater Lake Institute maintains a website that highlights the unusual incidents that have happened in and around the lake. And I went to this website and started reading through some of them. It's very
It was you.
Special Agent you. It was through this site that I learned about McCullough. It was also through this site that I learned the names of park rangers who responded to this incident. A FOIA request submitted to the FBI did produce 50 pages of documents that were forwarded to me. Inside the box of papers was a series of letters written by Charles McCullough's father requesting that the FBI become involved in his son's disappearance. When the FBI stated that they couldn't join the investigation, Mr. McCullough wrote letters to Harry Byrd requesting that Congress intervene. Like, this guy was serious.
Yeah.
Mr. McCullough was convinced beyond any doubt that his son had been abducted and taken against his will, and he may have been correct. The story you are about to read was gleaned from reviewing FOIA documents, newspaper clippings, and interviews with MPS personnel. Charles Wesley McCullough left his Virginia home on January 8th, 1975 on the trip of a lifetime. He was going to travel the national park system and photograph the splendor of our national parks. He was a very reliable and punctual son. He would routinely call his parents to explain where he was and the itinerary he would follow. He made calls to his parents on January 16th and January 22nd from Yuma, Arizona. The last call his parents would receive was on January 27th, 1975, while Charles was at a friend's place in Eugene, Oregon. On January 29th, Charles told his friend that he was going to travel to Crater Lake to photograph the park in its winter element. He said he would return by the 31st and that if he wasn't back by February 1st, to call the police. This is the last time his friend ever saw Charles. On February 1st, 1975, Charles' friend called law enforcement and filed a missing persons report. The NPS, in conjunction with state police, worked the McCullough case. The area around the lake and nearby cities were blanketed with flyers of Charles's face. The bulletins were not out long before a logger reported to police that he had given Charles a ride to the park entrance. He believed the date was January 30th, 1975. Per reports in the FOIA file, snow depths at Crater Lake were 24 inches to 90 inches with drifts of up to 20 feet.
Dang.
On January 31st, 4 inches of snow fell at the park, with more in the outlying higher elevations. On February 10th, 1975, Charles' parents were notified that he was officially a missing person. It's hard to understand why it took so long to notify the family, but that is the fact. The state police did confirm that Charles had traveled east and then south on Highway 138 to enter the park along the northern perimeter. This route would have taken Charles by Diamond Lake Resort, the closest resort to the northern entry of the Crater Lake. The police gathered this information from interviewing witnesses who had responded to their request for assistance. This is where the story gets very cloudy. There seems to be little information beyond the fact that Charles was in this location on January 30th in 1975. His father made at least 2 trips to the park searching for his son. The father's letters indicate complete frustration with the Oregon State Police in their investigation, but complete admiration for the NPS investigators. On the first trip that Mr. McCullough made to the park, he left a list of items that Charles would have been carrying should someone find them in the park. One item that was quite peculiar was an odd-shaped Volkswagen car key that would probably have been in Charles' backpack, which he would have been carrying. Several rangers were in the administration building and heard what Mr. McCullough was describing. One of those law enforcement rangers was Marion Jack. Marion was a seasonal law enforcement ranger at Crater Lake, usually working from late May to early September. This seasonal employment was a perfect fit for Marion and his family, as he was a full-time science teacher at McLaughlin Junior High School in Medford, Oregon. Each May, Marion would pack up and move his family to the seasonal housing area at Crater Lake in a region called Sleepy Hollow, where they spent 24 summers, 1962 through 1986. Marion was a graduate of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. The Law Enforcement Academy training was a nice addition to his bachelor's degree from Southern Oregon University. In early October of 1976, a group of hikers were well off the normal trails on the west side of the park near Bybee Creek. This creek drains water from the western high perimeter of Crater Lake, so there is an outflowing drain. The flow travels west towards one of the main highways surrounding the park. This is a very, very desolate area where most people would never travel. The hikers found a backpack and a scarf. They thought this was unusual. They searched the backpack, removed a few items, and then hiked to the main law enforcement office at Crater Lake. Once they arrived at the office, they removed an unusual key and other items. Just as the hikers placed the key on the table, Mary and Jack remembered that this was the key that Charles McCullough's dad had stated would be in Charles's possession. Marion just happened to be at Crater Lake in October because the park superintendent had asked him to bring up his horses so they could ride the range to look for trespassing cows that were grazing on NPS land. Marion asked the hikers where they found the backpack, and they stated that it was in the Bybee Creek drainage. The hikers drew a map of the location, and a decision was made that Marion and Ranger Dave Lange would ride Marion's horses into Bybee Creek and see if they could locate Charles McCullough. I knew at this point that I needed to locate and interview one of the rangers identified on the Crater Lake Institute site that had found Charles McCullough. Through an exhaustive effort, I found Marion and drove to his residence in Southern Oregon to meet him. Marion is one of those people who all of us are lucky to have protecting us while in the national park system. He was warm, gracious, and happy to be retired. We had a great talk about the general job he had every summer for 24 years, and then started to discuss the specifics of the McCullough case. He immediately stated that he would always remember that day because of the many unusual aspects of the scene. Marion confirmed that he and Dave Lange rode to the Bybee Creek area together. He said they found the scene fairly quickly because the hikers had hung clothing from a tree branch in an effort to make it easy to find. Marion said they walked down into a bowl-type area with a small creek running in one end and out the other. A tree with a 4-foot diameter crossed the area and, partially, the creek. Dave and Marion searched the small canyon and did not find much until Marion stepped over the large tree and saw a pair of pants immediately on the other side. He explained that if you were standing straight up and melted straight down into your pants, that's what it looked like. So they were like accordioned, is how I picture it. The first thing about the scene that struck him as unusual was that the belt buckle and the pants snap were undone. He reached down and found one broken tibia or fibula in the right leg of the pants. It was broken in the middle and had blood on each end. Okay, so he had a broken leg at least. There were no other bones in the pants or in the area. They found the elastic from underwear, but the underwear had deteriorated away. The 1 1/4 inch wide brown leather belt was still in good condition. Marion looked under the pants and found socks with small bones inside, but no boots, which McCullough had definitely been wearing when he disappeared in the middle of winter. Dave and Marion then started to walk in circles from the pants to locate other evidence. On the other side of the fallen tree, approximately 5 feet away, they found a skull upside down and a lower jawbone. They also found an area that was scattered with very tiny bone fragments. The Rangers did not find any large bones such as hips, shoulders, femurs, or vertebrae. They continued to search for other evidence such as Charles's coat, camera, and knife. After conducting a thorough search of the immediate area, they decided they needed to leave with the skull and other evidence they had recovered and return later with an FBI Evidence Response Team, or ERT. Dave Lange took numerous photos of the scene, and Marion remembers writing 3 separate reports on the recovery and evidence collection. The reports were submitted through normal MPS channels. He specifically remembers the father, Mr. McCullough, telling them that they would find a camera and a specific type of folding knife, 2 items that were never recovered. I asked Marion if there was anything about the scene on Bybee Creek that caused him concern or suspicion. He stated that he could never understand what happened to the young man's boots. They would have been heavier than the pants, so the pants would have washed away before the boots, if that is what had occurred. So in other words, the fact that the pants were there means the boots should have been there, right? He felt that the pants had not been moved since Charles died. I asked him to explain why the pants and belt were unbuckled. Marion said that was another very unusual part of the scene that couldn't be explained. The camera, knife, and coat were never found at the Bybee Creek location, but those were all with Charles when he disappeared. Other questions I asked Marion included, why were no large bones found? And why was there only 1 bone in 1 pant leg? He said these were all really good questions, but he didn't have any answers. It made no sense to him either. He asked me why there wouldn't have been any bones in the other pant leg. It appeared to him that the pants hadn't been disturbed since the time of death. The last question I asked Ranger Marion Jack was, why were bone chips and pieces at the scene when most animals would have taken the bones and left with them? Marion said that this is another aspect of the scene that has confused him over the years. He knows that bears would take a piece of body and walk with it, but these pieces were all consumed directly on scene, something he had never seen before. After Marion and Dave returned to the park headquarters, Oregon State Police and the FBI were notified of the evidence and requested to respond and assist with further recovery efforts. On October 18, 1976, FBI special agents and state police detectives delivered the skull and jaw to a Klamath Falls pathologist. It was the expert opinion of the pathologist that the skull did belong to Charles Wesley McCullough, and it had not been damaged. Case summary. There are many questions surrounding the disappearance of Charles. One of the best descriptions of the complexities of this case appears on the Crater Lake Institute website under the year 1976. McCullough's cause of death is ruled by natural causes, but the mystery remains how it was possible for McCullough to have walked from the north entrance on top of 105 inches of new snow, 14 miles into Bybee Creek, especially considering that the young man was not prepared for winter survival. One theory is that McCullough may have followed snowmobile tracks, but the machines are not allowed into the remote areas of the park. And secondly, the new snow was so fresh and deep, it would have been impossible for snowmobiles to have traveled that distance. So just how McCullough was able to get into the Bybee Creek drainage remains conjecture, as does his exact cause of death. The boy's father remains convinced that his son was the victim of foul play because none of McCullough's expensive camera equipment was ever found. So Paulides says, I don't profess to be a conspiracy theorist, but I do find it almost unbelievable that both Charles McCullough and B.B. Bukowski simply disappear from the Crater Lake perimeter. Both were photographers. Storms hit the area immediately after each went missing, and the MPS has lost all reports on Charles's disappearance. Yes, the pathologist did make a determination that Charles died of natural causes, but that is only an educated guess based on no visible injuries to the skull. Here are what about the foot, the tibia bone that had blood on the end? Right?
It was just broken in half.
Yeah. Here are the questions I want you to ponder. Number 1, where are Charles's boots? Boots are heavy. They don't blow away in the wind. Number 2, where is the camera and knife carried on Charles's hip? Like on his belt that were on the pants, right? That were supposed to be with Charles. 3, where is the coat that Charles was supposed to be wearing? 4, why would Charles's pants and belt buckle be undone? 5, if Charles did die on the spot where his pants were recovered, why was there only 1 broken bone in the right pant leg? 6, where were the left leg bones, the femur of the right leg, and the hip bones? 7, the pants weren't ripped to shreds as if a bear had gone for the meat of the leg. As Marion said, it was like he melted into those pants. The pants were found intact. How could an animal have consumed Charles without tearing the pants to shreds to get to the meat? 8. Charles's father was adamant with law enforcement that he felt his son was taken against his will and, because of those feelings, wanted the FBI to investigate the case. Do you think Charles's dad may have been correct? Below is an excerpt from the letter Charles's dad wrote to Congressman Harry Byrd requesting FBI assistance. Quote, with no evidence being found in the extensive winter and summer searching, and knowing him to be a responsible young adult, we can find no other presumption to explain his disappearance other than that he was involuntarily detained and killed, unquote. I requested a complete case file from the FBI on the McCullers' disappearance. I was given a few papers and letters, but was refused the evidence response team's report and refused the case file report based on what they claimed were, quote, privacy concerns, unquote. The NPS claims that they have lost all of their reports on this incident.
That's just too weird, man.
Now, one thing I really liked that you pointed out, like one of the first times we were looking at this case, was that like somebody could die and standing straight up if they were in deep snow, right?
Yeah.
So like that sort of makes sense, but the snow would also preserve him, and it seems like he would have fallen over after the snow melted. So it's weird that he
Unless like the top half of his body was
gone, eaten or all the way down into the.
But where are the boots?
Yeah.
You know?
And his coat and his camera. See, this is the other thing. The cameras bother me, right?
Yeah.
He's there specifically to take pictures. Sam Squanch doesn't want his picture taken. McCullough disappears.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to make light
But I
of this,
agree with the point about the bones being inside the pants. Like how do you?
Yeah.
Like,
and then like little tiny bones inside the sock still.
Like it was, yeah.
And the socks were in the pants. Like
it was there long enough, still standing up.
Yeah.
To decompose.
That's weird.
Like it's really strange. It's almost like cattle mutilation type thing. You know, like the flesh was just taken apart.
Taken apart while he was still standing. Yeah. And it's also strange that his pants were unbuckled and the belt was undone. Like that's weird too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess you could say if he died of exposure, that paradoxical undressing might have made him start to try to take his pants off, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really weird case.
Yep. Okay, let's see. All right, Martin Jerome. Okay, so the Watcher is saying also if his body decayed in the pants, they would be stained and stiffened by the body's decay. That's a
Right.
good point. Yep.
Yeah, well, so they might have been stiffened,
Yeah.
right? Which is why they were in the upright position
Yeah.
still.
Yeah, I imagine.
I mean, all conditions being perfect, right? Like you can imagine like any number of things happening and just the end result is that it's standing up straight, but it may not have always been because there was so much snow. It could have ended up standing up straight on the ground if
Oh,
it was
okay,
in
yeah.
one piece,
Yeah.
sort of frozen together by the liquid that had frozen.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it seems highly unlikely, but
Yeah.
it could happen. But still, it doesn't explain like why there were no shoes, no coat, no camera
Right.
found, and how far away he was from the
Right.
place he should have been.
Right, and that there were like 20-foot snow drifts, and
Yeah.
like he wasn't set up for winter excursions, and
How long late? How long later?
years and
was-
years and years
it was
later.
years.
Yeah. Let's see. He went missing. He went missing in 10/14/76.
So it's like somebody.
The last his friend ever heard from him was January 30th. Right.
Yeah. It's also weird that he told him like, if I'm not back by February 1st, call the cops. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like basically he knew that like it's like if I was going somewhere by myself, I'd be like, hey, like if I went to Big Ben by myself, I'd be like, dude, if I'm not back by Monday,
Yeah.
freaking call somebody. Something's happened because I'm coming back on Monday, or Sunday
Yeah.
night. So I think that's just a good precaution. That shows that he's
Yeah.
precautionary. He's not just like, he's not like Snake Force Go Glad, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't want to disappear totally. So
I would also point out they said that the snowfall was
okay, wait.
upward of 90 inches. Remember, folks, 6 feet is 72 inches.
Yeah.
90 inches.
Yeah. And 105 is what they were saying too. 105 in some cases. It was 105 inches deep or whatever.
Yeah.
Or 109. is that
Can't
what you
take
said?
snowmobiles.
Yeah.
Bears are hibernating.
Okay, so I was wrong. It wasn't years later. It was October of that same year. So he goes missing in the end of January. In October of 1976, that same year, a group of hikers were well off the normal trail. That's when they found his body.
So what? I mean, how could all of the flesh be gone out of his socks? Like, that's just crazy.
He's completely gone within. Yeah, there should be stuff left, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, the skull was over there on the ground.
And there's some like crazy ants that just been in there, just like nom 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 nom.
We've never had human before. God,
That's not cool, bro.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
Yep, I shouldn't have made that joke. It's too soon. 1976. Okay, so I have this one last case here that I marked for this. We got to take a break. Did we not stop
really?
the timer? Did we not start the timer?
I don't think we ever started it, but we do have to take a break.
We are actually right at the break time.
Yeah.
This is magic.
Good call. All of our stuff is working because we're using the old
Even though we didn't
computer.
turn the timer over, I looked at it, I'm like, hey, the timer's done. It's never got started, but it's actually the right time.
I told you, man. Magically, the computer's working, the monitor's working. Everything that Brenner gave us is working, even though we weren't using it.
All right. We'll be back for the final segment and one more missing 411 story and then some discussion.
Welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, a relentless and unstoppable pursuit of Sam Squanch. The final segment of the final hour, and we gotta let's hear what
Final story.
Final story
In the final segment of the final hour. This is like a final
It's the grand finale.
of episode 7-4. Okay. Martin Jerome Ryan, missing 05/30/1960, Silver State Falls Park, Oregon. So you can tell because I've just been going through the book, page by page, starting from the beginning for the show, that all of these have been in they're the Pacific Northwest, basically.
Yeah.
And Canada. Age of disappearance, 8. On May 30th, 1960, Martin Jerome Ryan was with his family and friends for a picnic at Silver State Falls State Park. Or, I'm sorry. Silver Falls State Park. Silver State Falls State Park. Several of the kids left the immediate area of the picnic to look at a squirrel. They watched the squirrel for a short time, and then all the kids except Martin returned to the picnic. Family members soon realized that Martin wasn't in the group and started to search for him. Martin's parents couldn't find the boy and notified park personnel for assistance. The Marion County Sheriff's Office responded to the park's call for assistance and started a grid search upon their arrival. So grid search is a very specific. I looked this up. The grid search is very specific. It's not just people wandering through the woods. They map out a grid, and then no stone is unturned. Basically, they make sure that every single piece of ground is seen by someone. Right.
Wow.
Okay. Sheriff Denver Young took charge of the search and rescue and supervised the on-scene deputies. During the first night, deputies and other law enforcement officials covered a full square mile of the area without finding a trace of the boy. On June 1st, 1960, deputies found Martin's body at the bottom of a cliff approximately 1 mile from where he disappeared. Here's the statement Sheriff Young gave the press at the time. Quote, wandering aimlessly through the dense forest, Martin walked at least a half a mile through the woods and stumbled upon a trail. He followed it to a footbridge that spans a creek. By then, it apparently was dark. There was safety at the bridge. The search parties used it frequently. But Martin darted across it. Panic must have seized him. He ran through another picnic area and into the woods. His flight ended a mile from where he disappeared as he plunged off a 100-foot cliff. So they were looking at his footprints, and he was running. Okay. He
So
ran.
He hid under the bridge, or
He got onto a trail after walking a half a mile through the woods, got onto a trail, which you have to know that go one way or the other, you're going to get somewhere. It's going to either take you back to the trailhead or to a campsite. He ran down the trail, across the bridge, into a campsite, through the campsite, into the woods again. And kept running through the woods, left the trail entirely after having been lost for over half a mile. This is what's strange about this case. This is why I picked it out. After being lost, supposedly, he finds a trail finally and then runs down the trail across the bridge into a campsite and back into the woods.
And this was
That same day, yeah. Or it was like evening, or the sheriff was assuming that it was dark when it happened, but they had no way of telling when the footprints were made. Okay. The statement is perplexing at best and disturbing at worst. Trackers may well have been able to determine that Martin was running through the dirt, and thus the sheriff believed he panicked. If Martin did walk through the picnic grounds and across the bridge, he must have known he was very near people. What would have caused him to panic? Why would the boy have run so fast to pass through a picnic area and cross a well-marked trail to eventually run off of a cliff? As I have consistently stated throughout this book, we can learn a lot about missing people by understanding what happened to the victims of whose bodies were recovered. If they don't study these cases thoroughly, then law enforcement is not doing their job to thwart the next disappearance. This is kind of what you're saying. Like, there's not enough details. Like, they're not looking at it right. In Martin's case, I believe there is much more to the story than the sheriff explained. At least 2 other people have disappeared from this park and were never found. What caused their disappearances? Did they panic in the same way Martin did? What is in the woods of the Cascades that would cause such extreme panic? It's panic so thorough and so penetrating that an 8-year-old would run for what he probably believed was his life. It would appear that 8 to 9-year-olds have a higher incident of going missing in the Oregon Cascades than any other age group. So that's all the ones I have marked for this week or whatever. And I'll probably mark more, and maybe we'll do some more at some other time. But I don't want to keep doing Missing 411 episodes. But I figure these 2 back-to-back episodes are good. We can do some other topics and then come back to it at some point, because I'll keep reading through the book and marking them.
And you're getting the other books too, right?
Yes, I'm getting the other books. Yeah.
Yeah. So which book is that?
This is the very first one.
Okay.
Missing 411, Western United States and Canada.
So he's still working on this project, and he's still
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure the later books, like
Yes, there's more interesting stuff. Yeah. Like, I have Devils in the Details. I'm going to start picking out ones from that book, and that one has very strange ones, like people that were found dead, floating in lakes upright, bobbing. Like, that's very strange. What was it? Were you the one suggesting that their blood had flowed to the? Is that you that said that? Or was that Brett? Yeah. Like, they had gotten the terminal lividity where the blood flows to the bottom of the body or whatever, because they died somehow being held upright, so the blood all flowed to the feet, and then when they were thrown into the water, they like bobbed like a top. That was a great explanation of that. And of course, in the coroner's reports you read of that, it doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't. It just the witnesses are like, he was found. We saw him floating upright. His shoulders and heads were coming up out of the water or whatever. It doesn't explain how that happened.
Yeah. So we've been having this ongoing conversation about the whole 411 situation, and I've never read the books, but Russ has told me tons of the stories, and I always have this problem that it's like it's frustrating for me because, and I actually didn't really know why. I'm just like, I'm just not into it or whatever, And he's just like, whoa, what's the deal? And so we'd been discussing it a lot recently, and I was pointing out that I think what the problem is that every story, like, you can hear the similarities between the stories, but each one has unique sets of details, and then also lacks sets of details that would really be useful or seem pertinent to the story. Yeah. And obviously with this type of situation, this guy, David Paulides, is like digging up this old information, and he can only find so much information, and he puts all of the information that he can find into what he writes in the book. So it is the nature of the situation that you lack details of certain areas, and it's like from story to story, like certain stories will have a whole lot of details in one about a certain aspect of it, and another story has a similar aspect, but totally lacks the details in those same areas, but has a bunch of other details in different areas that would be nice if the other story had those details.
Yeah.
So, I guess for me, like I always have those questions. Like after you read the story, I'm like, with the guy who dug the hole in the snow, it's like, well, they didn't say he built a fire. Did he build one?
Right.
And maybe those wouldn't really tell you, oh, well, he was murdered or it was Sam Strange. But it's just that.
Yeah. Why isn't that detail in there?
Why isn't it in there? Right. Why didn't they say there was no fire or there was a fire? They just didn't put it in there.
There were no signs of any fire that he made.
So Paulides can't just put the information in there.
Right.
And maybe the people that knew he can't ask anymore because it was in 1950.
Yeah. Or 1911, that particular case. Yeah.
So you just can't go get that information. And like where he can get more information, he does. Like the park ranger who's retired, he drives over there and talks to the guy and gets all these extra details.
Like finds out where he lives, all creeper style, and drives over there.
So what I've come to realize is that actually it's not that the 411 thing is frustrating to me. It's just the nature of the problem is frustrating, but that's not a reason to not be interested in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what it was. It was.
I think you were always interested. You were just like,
yeah, I just don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. I can't make a magnet with this.
And there are details about magnets that we don't have. And I'm just like, dang it. How do they work?
Yeah. That's right. And like I've pointed out, one of the other things that you have to see when you're looking at this, and I think I talked to you about this before, or I even mentioned it on the show, was like when you're looking at so at the beginning of each section in the book where he's like, okay, so this section is about this state or this area or this cluster, right? This is the Cascade Mountains or this is the Crater Lake National Park. The beginning of each section, he gives you a whole list, so you can just see the list of all the disappearances that he's got in this section, right? And it just gives you their basic, like when they went missing, what their name was, how old they were, what their gender was, right? And like when you look at one section and it's all like, except for two cases, it's all like young men. Yeah. And they all basically are short, young blonde guys. And then the two chicks that go missing are short, stocky blonde chicks with short blonde hair. Yeah. That could be mistaken for a young guy from behind wearing winter clothes or whatever. Yeah. That's weird.
Yeah,
that's
weird.
very strange.
And this is another thing, like we had Brenner on the show a couple times, and he's the guy that's like, well, so you need to get a whiteboard and start putting categories up there and just put tick marks on,
Yeah. Like get a giant map and put thumbtacks in it and draw strings between them.
I'm not oriented in that way. Like that's just not what I do.
Yeah, you're like an individual case basis. Like I want to solve this one, and then I want to solve the next one, and then I want to solve the next one.
So David Paulides is that type of guy, right? He's putting it together, making a case file, and
he actually has maps with strings on them going from one place to the other.
And Thomas Spriggs, did something that never even would have occurred to me. I guess like he comes up with this thing, and it's like, wow, this is these regional maps. Yeah. With timelines and everything.
Yeah, showing that you can see the disappearances going in a circle, or the thing is going back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. Like I would never have thought of that. And so I think there's probably a lot more to be done with these comparisons between all these cases.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be the guy listening when the next book comes out. Going, what about this detail that you don't have? Sorry, I hate that, but I can't help it.
Were his shoelaces red or white?
But it's a lot better when they're coming from the book, because a lot of times, like Russ would tell me one of the stories and I'll hear it, and there'll be this obvious thing, and I'm just like, oh yeah, but this, and he's like, oh yeah, that was in there, but it was gone. I'm like, dang it.
Yeah. So when I try to tell the stories from memory, I don't remember all the details, and Kyle sees these glaring holes, and then he's like, he totally tells me like the case is solved, and I'm like, no, that was actually in there. He just reminded me. And it was like this, and he's like, oh,
and that makes it even more frustrating.
Yeah, because he keeps trying to point out how this could be solved, and I'm like, no, they actually found his wristwatch. It was in the car. You're like, dang it. Tell me that at the beginning so that I don't think it's a solution.
Yeah. So having the story from the book with all the details in it is a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's still like, so was there a fireplace or not?
Yeah.
I don't know.
How long was the tunnel? Yeah, you know, and like some of the things, like the one that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, with that we talked about, that I read the story of last show with the guy who climbed the spire.
Yeah.
The reason I read that one was because it was one of the very rare cases where a person with a personal transponder, you know,
Right.
that's why I read it. And like, maybe that wasn't a good one to represent the cases, because you're right. Like, and like when you're just looking at that case individually, maybe you would say that there's not so much anything weird. This guy just made a mistake, right? It's when you back away and look at the whole bulk of them and you see all the details that are similar or whatever.
Right. So the cases that could be made normal by, you could say, well, this could have been a normal situation that just went bad.
Yeah.
It's all of the other cases that don't have those explanations, that have so many similar details to the ones that do.
Exactly.
That bring them into the fold and say, well, this could be connected.
Exactly. So that's why I think that he includes them, because he's like, look, this case, there's almost no detail, except that the details they do have match the weird details of these other cases that don't have any obvious explanation.
Right. So in Sherlock Holmes, the cases always begin with this obvious answer.
Yeah.
Right. And then it turns out it's completely something totally different that you never expected, that Sherlock Holmes already knew before you told him the last detail of the case.
That's right. As soon as he looked at the scene, he knew that answer, even though everyone else, including the reader, was thinking something completely different.
Had thought the total obvious answer.
Right.
So there are going to be, like, let's say there is some strange, like, abduction type thing happening here, or portal situation, or just whatever, some strange phenomenon that we don't yet really understand or know that's going on. There are inevitably going to be cases that are part of that phenomenon that look totally normal, or that could have a normal explanation.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So that's I'm derping myself, you know, by saying, like, certain cases that are normal or could have a normal explanation could still be connected to this other thing. Because, like, the one with, you know, there's just a bunch of them that there isn't really any. And the first thing that I do is start looking for what details might matter.
Yeah.
Right. That's
a good way to approach it too. Like, so I think one of the things that Paulides is trying to do with this, and he has actually gone and given presentations at search and rescue conferences now, right? Like, I watched one of them; it was fantastic. He had a huge screen, and he was bringing up all these missing people lists on there, and he was like, "So do you guys see similarities here?" And people were like looking at it, and he's like, "They're all doctors, and they all went missing within this 20-mile radius in this same park, right?" You know, like, pointing out that, like, when, like, search and rescue is there to find a lost person or an injured person who maybe not be lost. You know, there are plenty of cases where the person is totally not lost. They just can't move anymore because they've injured themselves, right? So they're there to find somebody who is, for whatever reason, lost to everyone else, right? So the person may get lost in the woods, may wander off the trail to go to the bathroom and then not be able to find the trail again, and then just gets completely turned around in the wilderness. Yeah. And they find those people, whether alive or dead. The other thing I have to point out is, like, when you're reading through these books, you get the idea that people are never found or they vanish without a trace a lot. No, they don't. Like, this is a very small percentage of a large number of cases where almost everyone is found.
Yeah.
Right? So the first thing you have to realize that is strange is when they vanish without a trace, and it's within minutes. That's the other weird part. Now, a lot of people have said, well, you know, these cases usually start out with there's a few people around, like the parents or the brother and sister or the grandparents or whatever, and they're like, well, he was out of my sight for 10 minutes. Well, anyone, and I've seen people say this, like, anyone who feels responsible for the loss of a small child is going to imply that they didn't take their eyes off them for very long. Yeah. Right? Maybe they weren't watching them for hours, and, you know, maybe the old grandpa was sitting there and he kind of dozed off and he woke up and, you know, and doesn't want to say that he was asleep for 2 hours and woke up and his grandson and was never found, right? But still, Like, it's difficult to understand how they can't find him with dogs, with infrared helicopters, with 8,000 man hours, and just, that's with a person who doesn't want to disappear. And they're in the middle of nowhere, so an abduction is almost completely ruled out, at least a normal, like, abduction type that we understand, like by a pedophile or some weird human. That's what's interesting about these cases. So you have to start out with that understanding right off the bat.
And you think about all of the people that do want to disappear that get found against their will.
Right.
Right? Like, it's the same type of people that are looking for these people that don't want to disappear.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good point, too.
So, I mean, there's like, criminals, masterminds that know how to disappear and they get found.
Yeah, right. Yep. And none of them go into national park to disappear. That's not a good place to do it. And if you want to disappear and live, I mean, I suppose you could like orchestrate a disappearance, like make it look like you went into a national park and vanished without a trace, but really you get out onto another highway, and like some guy picks you up and you go and
but the chances are they would find that trail. Right. The dogs would find it. I mean, if you look at like what you were saying, if you take all of the cases, the chances are they're going to find your trail that you actually faked going into the park. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you really went in there, the dogs just track you all the way to the highway.
Right.
And yeah, exactly. The main thing that was convincing to me at the very beginning of the whole of my getting into this was the dogs. Like the search and rescue dogs, the bloodhounds or whatever. These dogs are trained for this. They live for it. And especially over time when it's police dogs and they like not being able to find a scent from somewhere where here's the campsite. We know the person was here less than 12 hours ago. And the dogs can't find a trail for them walking off into the woods for that campsite. That's crazy. Yeah. And then, of course, the other weird aspect of it, which is a little bit different from like looking at the mystery of the missing people, is the problem with the park system itself. The upper administration, like, we lost the files on that. Well, what about the regional? Oh, they lost the files too. Well, what about national? Well, they lost them too. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's really weird. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do think it was you. Like the way that that guy was just mean.
Yeah. Now, okay, so in one of the discussions,
and how many people are calling him for information? It's just like one guy.
He actually called Paulides. That was what was strange about it, because Paulides was putting in the request, and he calls Paulides. And was like, "What do you want this file for?"
Yeah, that's just.
And Paulides was like, "Well, I want it for research, but that's none of your business. According to the FOIA legislation, the reason you want the file cannot have anything to do with the government's decision of whether or not to give it to you. It can't be, right? So, him just asking him that question, it was against the law. Against the law, yeah. Now, like you pointed out an interesting concept that you were like, well, look, the whole. Because the guy was like, well, look, it may develop into a criminal case, right? Yeah. And you were saying, well, there was this recent thing where the FBI totally shuts down that observatory, and then they wouldn't tell anybody about it. So there was all these conspiracy theories, and there were aliens coming down from the sky, and all this kind of stuff, and it was white sands, and blah, and all that stuff happens because the FBI wouldn't tell anybody why they did it, and eventually they said, well, it's because there might have been criminal. In other words, they were implying that they were investigating something criminal, and they didn't want to release information to the public because that would blow the case for them, possibly. Right. But what's weird about the Staciana Ross case is it's like 30 or 40 years old. Or 50 years old or whatever. She went missing in...
What criminal?
Right.
Which is kind of part of the larger question here.
Right.
Who is doing this?
What graybeard criminal are you chasing?
50 or 60 years or whatever is still happening.
Well, most of the witnesses are dead. Like the guy who was nearest to her when she disappeared was 80 years old at the time. Yeah. He's long dead. Maybe the guide is still alive, whoever, but, family's all gone. And, there are other cases in there where that happens, where he's like, there's no one left alive anywhere associated with this case. And they'll be like, well, with privacy concerns, privacy. Like, whose privacy?
Is that a legitimate reason that they can refuse?
It is if the person's still alive. But if the person has been missing, presumed dead for decades and decades, and none of their immediate family is alive anymore either, then saying that it's privacy is just...
Yeah.
Whose privacy?
Use.
Yours. Use.
Use privacy. I just don't like that guy.
Yeah, he was kind of nasty. Yep.
But, you know, again, in the Sherlock Holmes cases, the guy that's nasty, that's refusing to give you the information, is never the bad guy.
Right. No. It's never the bad guy. It just turns out that he's just an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. He has his own reasons completely separate just for being nasty.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't like the maverick investigators.
Yeah.
Like that's always a deal. And like, you know, it might be a criminal case. Well, you have had 30 years to figure it out. Maybe you should let somebody else work it.
It's you has had 30 years to figure it out.
I was speaking from first person perspective, but I get what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, like when you're talking directly to him, well, you have had 30 years to figure it out. If I'm just talking in general, you has had 30 years to figure this out. You're totally right. So, and it also, like, I know, and we talked with the Watcher with this, he has young children too. The whole thing about very young kids, I don't have very much experience with young kids. I don't have any. Okay. Paulides does, and he mentions this all the time. And like, I've watched conferences or big talks where he's got people in the audience that have children. He's like, anybody out here have very young children or whatever? A bunch of people raise their hands, and he's like, could your kid do whatever? And they're all like, no, you know?
Yeah.
So in general, I think statistically is what he's talking about. Now, you know, you might have like a crazy Sam Squanch son that like runs through the wood bare naked in the middle of winter, but not everyone has that. Most kids don't do that.
Right.
But I remember when we were young, I ran around in the woods with no shoes on all the time. But in the cold, I had shoes on. It was cold. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what I was doing when I was 2. I can't remember that stuff. But it also is very difficult to understand how a 4-year-old or whatever, like that one, like he's got that one case where the kid went 19 miles or 12 miles in 19 hours or something like that, over mountains and across fences and through rivers and, you know, 2 mountain ranges or something like that. And it's just like, and then the other question you ask is, what the hell were the searchers doing way out there?
Yeah, why did they go that far?
So, like, one of the most frustrating details of that particular case, and I'll look this one up and give it to you guys next time we talk about the 401 subject. But this kid, this very specific kid this kid went a ridiculous amount of distance in a very short amount of time, like 12 miles across deep wilderness with no trails, no roads or anything like that in 19 hours. And the question was, and they found him. In 19 hours, they were 12 miles away from where he disappeared. Why were they 12 miles away? The dogs wouldn't track the kid. So it seems like the searchers had something that told them to be there, but that detail is nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
And the case is too old to figure out what that is, you know? So it's like...
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's that stuff that's frustrating.
Now, in one of the newer cases I've got just enough time to put this out there. In one of the newer cases, in one of the newer books, I think this might be in Devil in the Details. I'll look this one up too. A little girl goes missing on a big ranch. And they've got horses and people out there looking for her all over the place. I think the search was going on 3 or 4 days. And the guy who owned the ranch next to them. Now, you have to imagine these are enormous ranches. So he's got this huge ranch, and they've got this huge ranch. So they're miles away from each other, the houses are or whatever. But this guy, who's been helping with the search, wakes up on the 4th day or something like that and tells his wife, I think I know where she is, but I may not come back if I go to get her. Like, and this is known. And then he goes out there expecting he says, I may come back pretty badly beaten up or something like that. Like he expects to go find the girl, but he also expects to be hurt somehow. He's not hurt, but he walks almost directly to her, and she's just wandering around, kind of in the doctor said that she looked like she was in some kind of daze, like she was sleepwalking when he finds her, and she was completely she had been fed, like given milk, like she had milk in her stomach. She was already missing for 4 days or whatever. She was unharmed, like very strange case. But the guy like woke up like he had a dream or something. He woke up and was like, I know where she is, but I may I may get my ass kicked going out there to find her. But he went anyway. He felt like it was his duty. And she was on his ranch, but just way out in the middle of nowhere. Very weird case. Very, very weird case.
It was him.
Right. A lot of people thought that too. And then of course, all the cops were like, how did you know where she was? And they did all this investigation. But of course, And there was another one in there where they eventually found a little boy who went missing. And he was in a trance, some kind of trance or whatever. And he was in there was the field and there was like a little hill, like a little cairn, and it had a hollow in it. And he was sitting in there and his dog was sitting on top of the little hill. And the searchers looked in the hole and the kid's sitting there with his eyes wide open, just staring like in a trance.
Yeah.
It's
freaky.
so strange. Yeah.
Hell no.
That's just freaky.
Yeah. It is weird. And like, the little girl was, who gave her milk? So anyway, I'll find those cases and we can go through them some other time. But I think that's about it.
Cool, man.
Yep. So you guys can, like I said at the beginning of the show, get a hold of us at the email at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
And you can check out our website at brothersoftheserpent.com.
Yep, and you guys can comment there, tell us whatever you want.
Check out the Snakelopedia.
And the Snake Bros Glossary.
If you don't know what's going on here, those are great tools to get up to speed.
That's
if this
right.
is your first episode.
Yeah.
Of course, they might help you with this episode.
Yeah, could help you. Skirp hard. Skirp
Yeah.
derp.
Make sure to go to at Snurkbrs at SNKBRS on Twitter.
Yeah, and share the shows with people. That would really help us out.
That's kind of the main reason why we got the Twitter account. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's a good way for people to share shows. If y'all use Twitter, we don't. We're really.
Yeah, we're
I
Twitter
had never
noobs.
have really.
Twitter noobs, yeah.
But yeah.
Yep. And don't forget you can donate to our pyramid scheme. Even $1 would be great. You don't have to doesn't have to be a lot.
Yeah. There's a PayPal link, a donate button on the website.
That's right.
So if you like the show, you want to help us out, that'd be great.
Yep.
Any amount.
Any amount. Yep. Would be great.
We'll be really happy to see 2 more cents. It's like, yes,
Someone gave us their 2 cents.
yeah. Or if you want to give your 2 cents in a different way, you can write reviews of our show. That'd be
That's
great.
true. And we've had listeners donate stuff to us, which has helped a lot. We just had a donation of a sound baffling panel. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
What is it?
That's sound dampening. Yeah.
Sound dampening panel to put in the Tangent Cube studio. That's awesome. And Brenner.
Thank you, Kmart.
Yeah, Kmart. And Brenner has donated a monitor and a awesome hourglass sand timer, the 30-minute long sand timer that we use all the time. Helps us a lot. Helps me a lot because I'm blind and I can't see the timer on the screen. So yeah, people have helped us out a lot. So thank you guys very much. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Good night, Adamu. Don't 411.